All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Bellevue School District Board of Directors regular board meeting for Thursday, September 9th, 2021. We'll start with roll call. I'm Francine Wiest.
I'm Carolyn Watson.
Christine Chu.
Erica Moise.
Seema Sarafan.
Art Jarvis.
Thank you. And now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a senior from Sammamish High School who is one of our ASB officers, Leo Ohara, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And could you lead us in the land acknowledgement, please?
We acknowledge, honor, and respect that our broad community of Bellevue School District students, families, educators, and staff live and learn on the traditional Indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples. We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to do so since time immemorial.
Thank you. And we do have the student update next, but we need to finish the acknowledgements and approve the agenda, and then we'll come back to the student update. So we have some other acknowledgements listed. We have Hispanic Heritage Month, Labor Day that just passed, National Public Lands Day. I also want to acknowledge that it's the 20th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. As someone who was evacuated during those attacks, I think it's a reminder that people carry different trauma with them that's not always visible. And as we welcome our students back this year, to remember that you can't always judge just by looking at someone, what they've experienced. It's also, September also marks National Constitution Day, and I think that's also particularly important in light of events in recent months in our country. With that brings us to approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, second, are there any changes? All right, hearing none. All those who approve the agenda?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. And that brings us to the student update. Leo, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. First, I would like to point out virtual to in-person learning has been a very cool experience. As people who've been so long in front of screens all day and, you know, so disconnected from people who we love, it's been truly wonderful to come back to school and see all our friends again. With that, we also, Sammamish High School has started a new tradition of having nest groups. And what nest groups are groups where students of all ages, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors, get to come together in a classroom. It's called our homeroom, where we all, you know, do icebreakers. We get to know each other. We get to talk about what our values are as a school. And so with this, we've really been able to establish a community of that cares about one another. And I think that's really valuable. As a member on the ASB Council, we met during the summer. We had a leadership retreat. We spent 2 days planning the first 3 days of our school. First, planning out how we want to do our nest groups, which has been currently a success. 2, we have planned our mental health assembly, as I was one of the speakers who shared my struggles through the coronavirus lockdown. And 3, our Spirit Assembly, which was, again, another smash hit at our school. Next, we have virtual to in-person learning. So yes, virtual was super hard on all of us as students. I was one of those students who was personally affected. My mental health suffered a great amount. And I got to share that at the mental health assembly. But I was super glad that we were all able to stay safe during this crazy time. Now, in person, it is super exciting, like I mentioned, and fun again. But mask safety is a huge concern at our school. During the spring, we came back to school, which was wonderful. People took the mask mandate more seriously then, but now that people are vaccinated, people don't really care as much, which is okay that they're vaccinated. But with all the variants going around, I'm personally worried about my students who are, at risk. I'm worried about my faculty that are at risk as well. So that's just another thing to point out. And then finally, as a robotics leadership member at my school, it has been crazy because we were one of the most active clubs at our school during the lockdown. We had meetings weekly for both our robotics teams at our school. And it was really hard to do that virtually, but we were still very successful in competing in our season. When we came back in person, though, we were very, very excited and very productive. We got a lot of things done. That's about it.
Well, thank you very much. You covered a lot. We really appreciate that. We really enjoy having the student updates and are glad to kick off the year with such a comprehensive update of lots of different things that are happening, and echo that as much as there are the challenges, the joyful parts of coming back together. So thank you very much. All right, that brings us to the next item on our, and you are welcome to stay, but you are also welcome to get things done since you are very busy. So that brings us to the consent agenda. I'm going to move that we approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Any comments? Yes, Director
Yeah,
Shu.
I just want to call out that the SIFE committee plan is in there, and the updates that we made, we're working on scheduling the community listening sessions. So there's no update to that. We'll give you, the plan itself is still the same as it was. We're working on dates. Second piece is the curriculum support work that we do. Someone had requested that there be a better sense, more transparency around what those activities entail that the board works on and that those that they don't. So at a high level, we've added to that plan that such a list for the year will be provided by November by staff. And then the third thing is that we've called our list of which we've prioritized a list of policies and figured out which ones we had already done work on, potentially through operations work or through procedures, et cetera, to address some of the issues that were raised by our own reviews, the EAG, et cetera. And so there's a shortened prioritized list in there of policy work. And the first two things that we'll be working on, family engagement policy will be the first one in the fall. I think that is of high importance. And also there's one other that I think we're going to get done in the fall. Erica, can you help me out? Do you recall the one that's coming up next? I think it's for gender inclusive schools. Yeah. So gender inclusive schools will come in the falls, and then we'll work on some others. But I just wanted to call out that was updated and in there.
Okay, thank you. And then I did note, and I just want to flag that for directors, that there were a couple of resolutions that were added. I noticed since the last time that I reviewed the entire consent agenda. So just want to give a moment to make sure people have seen those resolutions that were added.
The ones about the various scholarship funds that have run down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone's seen them. No questions about those. All right. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda? Say aye.
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 Aye. All right, consent agenda is approved. And that brings us to superintendent updates. Dr. Jarvis.
Thank you, Dr. Weist, members of the board. This is one of those meeting nights that I get to feel good. School is open. And I start there with the report. We, I believe, have delivered on the promise. I shared with you last month that one of the challenges and charges I received when I first arrived from parents and community was really the question, is it real? We made the statement that we would be in school, in person, 5 days a week for those. And I think as Leo just said, it is such a pleasure to have school open for the first time, full-time in 18 months, since March 12th of 2020, in the 1920 school year. We were able to, in addition to opening for 18,000 students in person, we were able to provide a virtual program for those who chose to stay that way. In the last week or so before school opened, there were a number of parents deciding which option they wanted, and we saw an increase. And the way this option worked, it was able to be accommodated right up to the last day of sign up. We did end up with a couple hundred more elementary students than we originally set out, and yet it was there. We have fine tuning that we're still going to be doing on because we do have those students. Our opening enrollment was ultimately down about 300 students. We had, again, a few hundred that switched from in-person to virtual, but for all practical purposes, we were well within range. But we do have a number of adjustments that we're going to be needing to look at, and those are in process to be sure that our programs and our staff and where the students are match up. But I'm very proud of being able to deliver on that promise. We did that with student safety, and we mitigated the pandemic even as it was swelling. So a small number of students, very small number, did test positive, but they were tested positive before school started. And to my knowledge, there's been zero transmission in the schools. We matched and met the challenges of the operations that went into school lunches. And as you have heard and would continue to hear from our deputy superintendent, one of the challenges was being short on staff. And you see that throughout the community in a variety of businesses and activities, but workers are hard to come by. So starting lunches, short-staffed, still made sure that all the students who needed lunch were served. I've teased a little bit about probably the most over-engineered lunches that we've ever seen, because the administration, the support staff, the entire staff worked hard to make sure that lunches went smoothly, whether that involved exterior and undercovered play sheds, whether it involved individual seats. I laughed as I saw little ones, some on their knees with their tray on the seat of the chair, and some sitting in the chair with the lap on the lunch, and others with a bag headed for some place that was comfortable to them. But there were virtually no issues around face coverings in terms of refusals. I think, again, I refer to Leo's comments, one of the challenges as we get more and more students in particular vaccinated is that feeling of invincibility and being invulnerable. And what we're trying to share, and I think, again, Leo said it well, is that this is for everybody. We're doing it not only for ourselves, but for everybody else's safety. But again, we're looking at the countermeasures that are working in the schools, and they're working well. You read and heard news stories about transportation in other places, and school buses with up to a couple hours delay. And I feel for them because, again, part of the labor shortage put school districts in a number of areas of difficulty. But Bellevue, that was not true. Again, Melissa DeVita, Don, and the entire transportation crew made it work. The biggest problem they had, if I hear it correctly, was that some people like to park in the schools in spots where buses are supposed to be going. And we don't have all the parents trained yet to make sure the buses can get in and out smoothly and on time. So there were some very slight delays, but what a credit to a wonderful transportation crew. I had the pleasure of doing something that I've done for many, many years, and that as a superintendent, to stand out and wave the bus drivers out on their first route that first morning. So 6:30 a.m. is a little chilly out there, but it was just the pleasure of watching basically 100 buses rolling out of the bus garage, and the smiles on the drivers' faces and the waving back and the excitement of drivers. So what a credit to our transportation to pull it together after, again, a year and a half of a lot of chaos. And they deserve credit for everything they did in that year and a half, but it was especially nice to see them running on time and on schedules and make it work. I would add, when I was talking about the food service, I wanted to add a second piece, and that is that we're seeing something that we've never seen before, and that's a shortage of deliveries nationwide, whether it's milk or foodstuffs. And Melissa could give you a list of all the suppliers that are notifying her that they don't know when they're going to be able to deliver on time. So it's quite the challenge. But Wendy and crew are still making it work and doing that beautifully. I think the food service staff, you have to give them credit for 18 months of unbelievable service to the community. But again, what a pleasure to see them doing what they do so well, and that's to put it together for the kids in schools. I would add my compliments to Jeff Thomas and the entire HR crew. The schools were staffed. They're ready to run. The staff was there. The agreements were in place to run smoothly, which they did. I watched smiles of staff and smiles on young people, and I don't think could ask for more as a superintendent of watching happy people doing their work and launching into it with everything they have. So my compliments, Jeff, to all of the hard work that took place to get the schools fully staffed and operational. I would add that I had a brief chat with Leo before we started, and he talked about soccer, but the fact that the athletics and activities, the music events, the plays, the drama are all underway. Everything that kids like to do in the clubs, and they've got a recovery task to do, as was alluded to. They can't quite just pick up where they were 2 years ago and make it all work, but they're doing an absolute spectacular job. If you haven't been to a high school activity in a while, I encourage you to go for no other reason than, as have the other teams, the pro teams, the college teams. They are so enjoying having people in the stands again, and so enjoying having people watch their work. But most of all, I think the most exciting thing is to watch young people enjoying being around each other in the activities and the after school. So I'm going to wrap up my comments and invite some others, but I'm going to start with, we did it. And as we did it, if you can get a picture up for me. There's a picture of a school bell. I won't delay it if you see it in here. There's the bell, and I got a chance to ring that bell at Stevenson Elementary, symbolically to call all of the Bellevue students back to school on opening day. It was just a special privilege that I guess I feel as a superintendent to be able to symbolically ring that bell, but more importantly, to deliver on the promise to the community, to bring the kids back, to say, yes, we'll be doing more fine tuning. We don't have it down perfectly. We don't have everything matched, but it's a magnificent effort and it's beautifully done. and appropriate. So Eva Collins, if I may turn to you, I don't know if you have any of your staff that might have an anecdote or two, but I think that would be pleasurable if they happen to have those.
We do. We were all out and about on the first day of school, and we have some stories to share. So the executive directors of schools, who would like to start? Heather Sanchez, why don't you start? Elementary. Thank you. Could probably do without the mic. Just a quick little anecdote from Medina Elementary School, visiting on the morning of. One of our younger primary learners walks into the building, looks around, puts hands on the hips and says, "Oh yeah, I remember this place." And it was just glorious. And then the next piece is, this may sound odd to some of you, but the smell of the lunchroom down the hallway, the smell of the cafeteria, and then walking out to Anatai Elementary School, the playground, the peals of laughter from the children on the playground. It just absolutely made my heart sing just to have the children back in the building full time.
I can go next. The first thing I'll share is my daughter's an 8th grader at Highland, and she had an amazing first week back. She didn't say it in those words exactly, but I could tell by how much she was talking at dinner time that she just had a great first week. And so just kudos to the Highland staff, to Ms. Helgeson, who's her counselor, for all their hard work. I just wanted to share, like, it was an interesting thing, you know, for teachers to be coming back for the first time this fall, and there was a lot of stress and anxiety about coming back together, thinking about the virus and everything. But schools did an amazing job just making joy the center of their work. And so the first professional development day, I joined the Spirit Ridge staff, and the theme was Camp Spirit Ridge, out in their back, you know, on the playground amongst all of the trees. Teachers brought camping chairs. They brought their thermoses with coffee or hot chocolate. They had Pop-Tarts. And they turned things around and made it fun. They spent the whole day outside doing their math training, focusing on, like, how do we build the theme of together at Spirit Ridge? So just like you're talking about the nests, you know, at Sammamish, they're working on the theme of together at Spirit Ridge. And so staffs, I mean, just kudos to Bellevue School District teachers and staffs for coming together and making this a really joyful experience at the beginning of the year.
Here we go. I got it. It is challenging to narrow the examples of joy. I know, Leo, you talked about Sammamish. When I went there, and I went in all parts of the commons, the gym, the cafeteria, and to see the students engaged with one another, and in some cases quite intimately in conversation and dialogue and discourse, was amazing. It was the first day of school. And I think about, like, just entering these schools at the beginning and being greeted by students, by cheerleaders, by the band, by folks calling people by name, going up and introducing themselves to people that were alone, was really heartwarming. And from a personal, local, and immediate level as well, this was the first opportunity that I've had as an educator to see someone in my family on the first day of school either go to school in the morning or come home in the afternoon. And my oldest grandbaby is a kinder here. Their family sacrificed to come to this district to be able to have the education that we want for every kid. And to see her at the end of the day coming out after hearing that she cried during the day, she was sad, they had just moved, and to be having her look to see, is mommy there, is grandma there, someone, and being so happy. Like, it literally warmed my heart. And to see my son, a 5th grade teacher at Lake Hills, bringing a little treat, and to see him really affirming a young woman in his class, and in such a way that she had voice, she felt empowered, you could see it, and the class celebrating that on the first day of school was amazing. And I think the most profound picture I have of success is a young person at our high school who came, who has not stepped foot in a school in a very long time. He came, he stayed all day. He was not yet in a classroom, but that's the baseline, and that's an amazing success. And it was really heartwarming.
Hello, hi. I'm Gloria Henderson, supporting the middle school, so glad to be here. It was really great. I heard such amazing things from my wonderful ED team, and they told me that the Bellevue School District has some amazing schools, and I've been able to see that. As I've visited middle schools. So I was really impressed and heartened by, even on the 4th day of school, that social, emotional, and well-being was integrated into the students' academics, and that took center stage, and at the same time that the academics were uplifted. So it's really awesome to see that social, emotional, and well-being concentrations just don't occur on the first day of school. So that leads me to believe that throughout the year, that will be ongoing to support our students' needs, which will support them long-term academically. Thank you.
Melissa, would you like to add anything from the standpoint of the wonderful view of the world through operations?
I would just like to say that our operations team really was so supportive. The fact that many of you know that Ardmore had a leak over the summer, the fact that they got that school back put together, every teacher was in the classroom that they planned to be in. Nutrition services, despite being down 20 staff members, and the supply chain being so disrupted right now, they're able to feed 30% more students on a daily basis. Transportation, having drivers, where there are districts across this country that are delaying school opening by 2 weeks because they don't have enough drivers. Custodians being in our buildings all summer, making sure that they were clean and ready for our students and keeping our students healthy. And I know I'm forgetting people, but I just want to say that our operations staff was super supportive, and so glad to see our students back in buildings. So it's just exciting to be here.
And that concludes my superintendent's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. Directors, are there any questions? Comments? Director Chu.
So I am delighted that we are back in school and exceedingly impressed across the district with the work going on to make this happen. So thank you to everyone at all levels and in all the spaces that are making this all real for our kids. My question is simply, did I miss it, or did you give enrollment numbers?
I did not. And I have Melissa with the actual numbers. I apologize.
So we had forecasted to be down by 600 students from last year coming into this year. As Dr. Jarvis said, we are down 300 from our original forecast. And so we are currently at, sorry, I need to do a little bit of adding here just because we count virtual enrollment a little bit separate, but we're at 18,150 right now.
What percentage loss is that? That sounds,
900
significant.
students is, so again, we had estimated to be down some, and then I can talk a little bit about some of the drivers. Give me a second.
and that's 900 from the end of last year, not the beginning of last year?
It's from the October count of last year. Okay.
300.
So it's 900 from 19,500. So it's just about 5%, 4.6%. I think there's a number of different things driving it. One of the biggest factors is the lack of visas from other countries. And you see that in Stevenson and Wilburton. Both of those schools are down over 100 students. Those are the schools where we see a lot of students that are from other nations, such as India and others, where their families come here to work for our tech companies. And so we just don't have those students coming into the country. Not only that, we've heard from a number of families that they cannot get visas back into our country right now, that it's a super long timeline. So we're missing quite a few students because of that. We're also down because of students that went to private school last year. We're not sure if they're going to be coming back. We're also down because of the cost of housing in our area and the lack of availability of housing, as I commented before. Housing in the month of August alone is 19% higher than it was last summer. So it just, when you have a 20% growth and when the median price of a home in Bellevue is over $1 million, it's very hard for young families to move into this area. So that is adding to it as well. And with the uncertainty of enrollment, we did not fully open our schools to requests from other districts at this time because we just didn't know where we were going to end up this fall. My hope is that we get back into a much more predictable pattern. Last year and this year were very hard for demographers and others to predict what was happening with enrollment. And so the fact that we're within 300 of our forecast, I think is nothing short of amazing, to be very honest with you. I wish the numbers were higher. But even with the Delta variant coming on strong in August, I'm sure that even caused an impact as well. So there's a number of different factors driving that. We do need to look at our enrollment and do some things to make sure that we sustain enrollment moving forward.
And just to clarify, the 600 or so students who are enrolled in the online learning programs, they are included in our enrollment?
Yes, so there's 657 students in our online learning programs. They are included in our overall enrollment. They're not included in the in-person enrollment as we look at staffing and class sizes. We are looking at them though as we maintain smaller class sizes with the anticipation that hopefully if vaccines become available for children under 12, for example, they could re-enter our schools.
And just one more clarification on those 657, I think it was you just said, students, are we getting 100% funding or 0.75 on that?
0.75.
And no adjustment for cost of living or anything in the area, is that correct?
No adjustment for cost of living or anything on that.
Thank you.
I would add one quick comment, Director Chu. I had people explaining to me this morning Bellevue, because yesterday, Wednesday, after Labor Day, we had over 80 kindergarten children show up. And it surprised me that basically 1 out of 12 waited till then to show up. So I learned something about Bellevue, but my point would be that we're still getting students in, so we're still adjusting the numbers, and that's a fairly substantial number of kindergartners on Wednesday after Labor Day. So we're delighted to have them, and they can continue to bring them to us, and we'll be wide open for them, but it did take me by surprise that we would have those numbers. So we're happy to have them. Thank you.
Okay, Director Watson.
Do we have any sense of the total kids we lost from January 2020 when this virus first appeared?
I don't have that number with me right now, but I'm happy to get that number for
Okay.
you.
Okay, are there questions? Director Chu.
I have one more, I really want to understand this funding picture and what it's put before us. I just want to understand. So for what we budgeted for staffing and hired for staffing, was that based on having 300 additional students and having a percentage of those 657 students in our buildings full-time? So like by how much have we budgeted for staffing that we didn't need to budget for staffing, but you know, it's there. So can you like just explain that financially to me, please?
So we're still working through the specifics because as Dr. Jarvis stated, we are getting more students. In fact, between yesterday and today, we picked up 30 more students. So through the month of September, we will continue to gain students. That being said, from a staffing perspective, high schools were about even, a little bit over in terms of enrollment. Middle schools were down a little bit in enrollment, and then elementary is where we see the most significant drop in enrollment. Again, I do believe quite a bit of that is due to the virus, vaccination, and then those other factors that I have talked about. The staffing impact is about 24 teachers right now, but we do have opportunities for those teachers in the virtual program and other places. But if we were going to go back and just restaff based upon actual in-person numbers, we would probably have 24 less certificated staff in our buildings.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I have full confidence that the team is going to put our staff, and our staff is going to put themselves to incredible use on behalf of the students in our district. No doubt about that. I just want to understand the funding impact for us. So it does mean we'll get that much less funding from the state. So we'll get 300 fewer students worth of full funding, and we're getting 25% less plus another percentage less because we're not getting the adjustment on the higher cost of living that our district bears on the 657 kids.
Correct.
So that's a pretty big number.
So, you know, as part of that right now, we're going through and realigning our budget, and we're looking at, you know, frankly, over the next year, we've got to put some spending controls in place, because that's when you don't get the revenue you're anticipating getting. And we'll continue to monitor it month to month, but that's when you put spending controls in so that you're not spending up to your budget, right? And that's kind of where we're at right now, and that's the responsibility of the leadership team and others to make sure that we control spending as we go through the next 12 months.
Okay, any other questions, directors? So we're going a little long on this section, but some of this is going to play into other agenda items. There was a mention about the potentially some of those staff being used more robustly in the virtual program. And Dr. Jarvis, I know you also mentioned that there are some adjustments going on with the virtual program. Can we just expand on those a little bit more? I think that's one of the big issues that we're hearing about as board members, you know, the equity in terms of what we're able to offer.
I'll mention three things. Number one is we look, of course, at the class size, and we look at the targets for class size and try to figure out where we would be able to do something differently and whether it would work. I will give a huge shout out to the staff as I've sat through now several of the meetings as we're looking at that, trying to really put forth the best interests of the families and the kids and recognize that here's where we are, how do we make best use of staff. But that is one of the factors that we look at, is just plain class size. And if we were a target was 26 and we see 16 in that class, there's a pretty sizable difference there. But then part of the conversation is what else are we trying to do in that school and that grade, and so we're looking very much at how do we also engage the staff in some people who would like to try help us do something else or something differently before we just make an arbitrary move and say you've been reassigned to somewhere else. A second piece is that we've tried to take into consideration that some of the remote virtual families and students will want to come back. So we're trying to make sure that we keep room and opportunity for those young people and recognize that the way this crazy pandemic and the waves go, that we do anticipate that there will be students returning, and we want not to shut them out or lock them into where they have to be for a year. And the third part is also that as we saw that last minute swing from in-person to virtual, I want to put that in perspective of 18,000 students in person and moving from basically 500 to 700 or from 400 to 700 in virtual. It's still a couple percent, but we did see that and we saw the news. So part of the look is how do we support that in our virtual at the same time, not again lock ourselves into staffing that has to be retain the kids in that position for the full year. So we're looking at ways to enhance the virtual. We're looking at ways to best use the staff. We know that a couple of quick examples, we will have long-term substitute positions that come up where we typically have to hire someone for the balance of the year for a maternity, perhaps, to make up an example. So if we do have staff, how can we use that staff to fill some of the needs that we have and do it well as a system? So I could go down a list of about a dozen possible uses, but that's what we're trying to do very gently. And we don't have a lot of time because we don't want to wait too many weeks. But at the same time, we didn't want to ride over the top of staff and principals and just say the budget drives everything and we'll go ahead and make the switch. So again, Melissa and crew have been fabulous to work with, and Jeff is on top of that world. We do have the October 18th coming up where we have some staff members that may choose not to be vaccinated, and under the state guidelines that would cause them not to be present. So we're trying to factor in all of those pieces, and I don't mean to be vague as much as trying to make it all work in a really effective system and do it in a way that honors the work that has been done and is being done, and I would say a good morale of making the system work in not the best of circumstances, but still some hard things. So I hope that helps a little bit.
No, that helps a ton. Like I said, I think our staff is going to do a great job figuring it all out, the puzzle. I just wanted to understand the financial situation and the implications for the district short and long term. I also would point out that in addition to all the logistical shuffling that you have mentioned, there's also the opportunity to recognize the higher burden of mental health impacts to our students across the district at this point. So the idea of relationships with adults is really important, and any opportunities to enhance that or strengthen that for kids is great, as is the fact that we have a lot of students who are not fully connected and not fully served by the system. And so again, another opportunity for us to use a temporary surge in staff. I mean, it's not a huge surge, but it's a, whatever, that there's another place. So I am sure, high confidence that the people themselves and the district overall will find great solutions. I really just wanted to understand the picture financially. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, Director Chu, for bringing up some of those questions that assist us in our role with board oversight, especially with regards to the budget. If we could just follow up a little bit more on the what types of things we might anticipate coming forward in enhancing the virtual options for students. So understanding that we've seen a larger number of students enroll than previously expressed interest in the spring when some of the decisions were made. Understanding now feedback we're getting directly about kind of the content and quality of the program, and then realizing that the time frame that some of those students may choose to eventually return back in person is really indefinite at this point. What are those things that we might anticipate as the enhancements?
I'm going to invite Ava Collins into this conversation because I think she's been working about 23 hours a day on that very question with her staff. But Ava, would you comment on some of the work that you're doing?
Certainly, thank you. And we are in conversation with BEA. We're meeting with them in the morning to talk more specifically about what the role would be of elementary teachers who can help support in the virtual academy. As Melissa said, we did staff our elementary schools, including all of these virtual students, as if they would have been in person. And so we're separately serving them in the Edgenuity program, but we're essentially paying for staff that in the buildings as if they had all of those students. You know, if you can imagine that. So our class sizes are quite low in the elementary schools. So for the virtual academy, we recognize we have about 450 students in that academy, and we recognize that many of the kids will want to come back in person, or at least that's what their parents have said to us. Once a vaccine is available, many of the parents have said we want to bring our student back in person, and we want to make that as smooth a transition as possible, and we want to make sure the kids are getting an excellent education, even if we're not able to serve them with our own teachers in the way that we have done previously. And so for that reason, we're working with BEA to determine how we can support with elementary teachers that would be specifically assigned to supporting students in the virtual academy, which could mean social emotional time, literacy support, math support, assessments, and communication with parents. Those types of things are what we're looking at and having conversation about. And we want to get this in place as soon as possible. We know time is of the essence, but we also had this unknown around enrollment that we couldn't just add teachers to the virtual program before school started because, like I said, we counted all of those students in our in-person enrollment before the school year started. Additionally, for the secondary, we are increasing counseling support for our secondary students. So we have counseling support at the elementary and secondary level, but we realize the need is greater than we had anticipated. And so we'll be increasing that to better support our students with their schedules or just with study skills or any kinds of support they need, whether it's social, emotional, or other support. So we will have counseling there. And we are also considering having some level of a secondary teacher support as well for the virtual academy. It's trickier to have educator or teacher support because every student has, there's just such a wide range of courses, so it's not necessarily content expertise as much as it is just academic support.
Thank you. And then the other point, if we could get some clarification, we know we've talked a lot about lunch and meals, and in your report, Dr. Jarvis really emphasizing too how the schools have really done a lot to make sure that students are physically distanced when they're indoors, but there had been some talk that schools would potentially also try to offer some outdoor options. How is that going?
The weatherman has assisted us beautifully, and I say that sincerely. The opening couple days were a perfect example of how to also open the outdoors and make it as part of a facility and make it a useful part of the lunch, but recognize that that's probably not going to be quite as useful 8 weeks down the road from where we are. But the covered play areas, the open areas, really the campus as a whole, depending on which school, and you know some of those schools where they've got a field area, a forest area, a play area. And so they were very much wide open, and the schools had different patterns depending on the size of the commons and the lunchroom and some of the options. So some were able to have more students at a time but spread out differently, and others went to every grade level, had their own lunch, and then they were able to spread. So it was quite the array of white dots and blue dots and red dots, and where they could go and how they could go. And I have to say, it worked absolutely wonderfully from my perspective as I watched and watched. It went smoothly for the young people. It went smoothly for the staff, and they had a lot of staff that was assisting really the entire building. So I don't know if you want more particulars than that, because it did vary at the secondary versus the elementary, but the staff and the students did an absolutely gorgeous job of figuring out how to use the facility as a whole, and then keep the young people safe and distanced. And so you saw in essence, the 6-foot distancing of the chairs or the seating places. You might see a longer table, but with one blue dot on one side where you could sit and a white dot on the next table on the other side, alternating. So it really kept kids safe, and they could drop their mask and eat, and then they could put their mask back up and go out and play if they were elementary. But it was, we could probably spend a good amount of time just going through the various schemes at the elementary. The principals were quite creative in how they approached it, depending on their building and their staff and the students. So high schools were, I think you could certainly ask Leo, but they were very much enjoying the nice weather outside, and I would say the vast majority of the kids found good places where they could somehow sit and they could still be with their friends, but they weren't trying to violate the social distancing side of it. Some were better than others in that.
Okay, so it sounds like there have been outdoor options, but it perhaps isn't as widely understood or known yet in the community. And we've only been in school for a couple of actual days, but that perhaps is something that there's a perception that there is no outdoor option, and so that it's good to hear that there are those options, and then perhaps having that better known to our school community.
If it wouldn't have been a violation of privacy, I would love to have seen cameras just displaying how people made it work, because I think it would give people tremendous confidence in the food service staff, the principal, the entire staff at the schools, and taking that very seriously. So it wasn't violating the safety by any means, but at the same time, it was taking full advantage of everything from sunshine to covered play areas to tables and chairs. And it's not as friendly if you said, one of the things I love about school lunchtime is watching kids interact and being able to be as social as they can. So this is a little less social, or maybe a lot less social, but very effective in terms of eating and not getting people infecting each other.
We got some feedback about some buildings, there not really being enough time for some kids to get through the line and get their food and have enough time to eat wherever they sat.
If you'll let me know, because I have not had that feedback.
Okay, I can try to find it.
Okay, thank you.
I know one mom of my acquaintance said that she was basically trying to be pretty chill about it, just send her kids with a lunch until things got ironed out. But this may have been international school, actually. I can look it up.
I can chase it down.
All right, anything else? Well, thank you. So again, spending a little extra time on the update as we've actually started school, first meeting, board meeting back with the school year. I think that is time that we will be able to make up in the rest of the agenda. So if there's nothing further, we'll go on to the next item, and that's committee work. So we don't have particular reports that are listed under any of these areas, so I'm just going to go through each committee and see if there is any additional update. So for Goalcom,
We moved our meeting to this Friday, so we'll give you an update if there's anything significant next. I know it's not the next governance meeting, but if there's anything big, we'll tell you next meeting.
okay. And will that also include any further discussion that we need in advance of General Assembly for WASDA? Will that include the ledge rep update?
We will cover as much as we can on Friday, and what I can promise you is we should have our plan finalized, our legislative advocacy work, and if there's some highlights from the General Assembly, we can bring those as well.
Okay.
Seema, is there anything else you would?
No, I think that covers it.
And we do anticipate, since General Assembly was moved, that we anticipate having representation.
We'll have representation no matter what. One of us will be there.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. Any other questions for Goalcom? No? Okay, so for students instruction and family engagement, we discussed that a little bit with the consent agenda. Is there anything else?
Not really. I think Erica's gonna.
Yeah, I mean, just Director Chu already mentioned that we're planning the fall listening sessions. These are going to follow the same format as the ones we did in the spring, with sessions for educators, for staff, for families, and then some particular outreach groups. So we'll be asking for your participation in those. And like the spring, there's going to be a bunch of them, so it will probably be a bit of a heavy lift as far as time commitment, and apologize for that, but hopefully we can spread it out enough that it's convenient for everybody.
And we're keeping them online. It's not just a safety thing. It's the feedback that we got, especially from a lot of our professionals, that the ability to just jump on when they're making dinner or whatever was meaningful to them from families and childcare issues. And so we're going to keep them online for this go. There's a chance that for some of the advocacy ones, if something comes up, we would consider otherwise, but effectively online.
All right, that's fine. If we do decide to have, for example, one of the general family ones or just general open ones, kind of like we have for board meetings, to have in person, I would be fine with that as well. I think that there is, for some people, having that option to be able to attend in person there's the balance. For some, it's timing, and being able to just pop in virtually is very convenient, but for others, there's something about having the in-person. So if we have the opportunity to have one section that way, I think that we can at least try it. Anything else? Okay. Finance and Operations Committee, we approved our report a couple of meetings ago. Director Watson, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's just flipping through my notes here on the fly. We did talk quite a bit, I think, about the budget, and we're going to do that later here, so probably don't need to say what we learned about that there. And then also upcoming, we're anticipating working on policy 4311.
Okay.
SROs.
All right. Anything else? Questions? No? All right. So then executive committee. Oh, go ahead.
One other comment, just one of the things that we will be working on, and you will see from the, at least SIFE, is an engagement plan, because the 1240P asks that if the committees are going to do work that engages families and community and staff and other stakeholders, that we present that plan to the board in advance if it's significant outreach, and get some feedback to make sure that the board is getting all of the stakeholder input that it needs. So I just wanted to call out how important it is that if there is engagement work being done, that we kind of share it up front. And I think the critical criteria, if we're doing those not just as a reflective look at the policies, but in planning how we do our policies, that is going to push us to make sure that we have engagement planning up front.
Okay, great. Then executive committee, Director Watson, is there anything else? We did review this at the last meeting. Anything else you want to add?
No, I was just, last time I gave you the board development plan, did I? Yeah.
Okay. Any questions, any thought that directors had in the meantime? to input into our development plan? Okay, there'll be another opportunity if you think of something. We just bring it up there. And then we have not initiated yet, but will be trying to, as we mentioned last time, have a meeting / liaisonship with our city council. And again, that kind of brings us right into board business, board director updates, including liaison reports. So what I'd like to ask in preparation for the board's annual reorganization meeting in December. So already to start think about putting together a couple of bullet points on your current liaisonships and having that available that we can have in written form in probably our first November meeting, so everyone can see what the main time, responsibilities, what's been going on, so that's ready.
Okay.
So just already highlighting that for you. It will be a homework assignment that'll come through on your email. And I'll just jump in. I had YouthLink, this is my liaisonship. They had a retreat and the students are off and running, and it's just really exciting combination of returning students and new students and getting ready for the year. So it's just always a thrill to interact and hear about what they're going to be up to. Anybody else have?
I can give a quick one on PTSA.
Yeah.
So it's now Emily Castle as the president of the PTSA Council. Had a chance to meet with her and Melissa Richardson over the summer. But the first big meeting is coming up on Monday. So for our next board meeting, I will be able to give more of an update. But basically just forthcoming meeting, Monday the 13th, new leadership, and I think a lot of excitement around the start of the new school year. But I also will have feedback on some of the things that I think are top of mind.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Director Malif?
Jubilee Reach had their day of service the Saturday before school started. They had 1,200 volunteers in 25 schools. It was a really incredible turnout. And the report from Randy was that everyone was so happy to be in the schools, to be like in the classrooms and seeing how things were going to be getting set up. And now that school has started, their site coaches, they have more site coaches in our schools, are reporting that they are so happy to be seeing the kids and seeing more kids and feeling the energy like in the school, really like bringing everyone up. And on a personal level, my own kids who are in 1st and 2nd grade are really happy to be in school in class. They just can't stop talking about this friend and that friend. They are eating lunch outside. Everyone is eating lunch outside. So that's just one example of that. But yeah, it's been really, really great to have them back in school with everybody that they know and love.
Thank you. Director Watson, do you have a report?
For special needs PTSA, yeah, they have fewer meetings, but I did talk to the new president, which is Amy Lennox, and I'll try to coordinate our schedules so that I get to most of their doings.
Excellent, thank you. And Director Chu.
All right, I don't have a big update on Bellevue Schools Foundation, so I'll try to have that for next time. But clearly they continue to serve our kids and our families and teachers, and we are now being formally recognized across the country for our national board certificated teachers. We are 4th in the country for having those. We are at over 45% or around 45% of national and board certified teachers. So I think I just want to call that out for a minute because it is an incredible example, or it's one manifestation that shows how dedicated that our staff are, even over COVID, to keep working on national board certification under those conditions while they're serving kids under adverse conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So our district, our board, our community, our Bellevue Schools Foundation, all committed to the professional development and growth of our staff, and it's a big deal. So just want to appreciate that. Second is a quick update. on the East Side Pathways group. And there's a couple of things going on there. One of the things they're working on really hard is trying to figure out how to measure progress across the organizations that are working together on things. And so they've struggled like we do about what the right measures are, especially at the beginning of implementing things. Is it implementation fidelity you want to measure, or is it kids outcomes for kids? Ultimately, you do want to measure outcomes for kids, but like we have done in many of our programs, they are starting with some measures of fidelity. That's a big deal because that is how collective impact actually usually ends up impacting in a greater and more significant way, because all the partners come together and agree on, or all like small relevant groups of partners working on something will agree on a particular measure of progress, and we're one of those partners. So that's a powerful opportunity for us to really align with our community resources. So we will have the opportunity to re-sign our agreement to partner with them in December, and I think we still need to finish finalizing our agreement for this past year. I think that might have fallen through the cracks a touch. And the other thing that they are doing that is really interesting is they have just over the last 2 years made a tremendous commitment to being more aware as an organization and more supportive to other organizations of helping everyone to be aware of how equitable they are, how effective they are for all students and families and the people that they're serving. And they've started to live their values by that and ask each of their partner organizations and their board members to live that value. And it seems to be paying off, and we'll see what it does when they have more data about results. But it's another unifying force that's bringing the groups that are helping our community together. So I just thought I know that's a little background info and not as much student forward, but it is touching our students in the end. So just a little info there.
Thank you. And thank you. And you've taken on the extra liaisonships. There had been talk that if there were meetings that you had difficulty making, that we could pitch in. If you have a kind of calendar for the next couple of months, if you've identified any, please share that with us. And that way we can make sure that we have robust representation.
I would love to go to their big all hands meeting, whatever they call that meeting.
Oh, that I think doesn't happen for many more months, but let me make a note of that, Caroline.
All right, yeah.
And I do want to also call out, sorry, all hands BSF, Caroline. Okay. Sorry, yes, bad notes. Okay, there we go. That there is one other group that Francine and I meet with together. So Francine, were you going to do an update on the schools, the group of schools and the advocacy there and the work with the health department?
Why don't you do an update, and I have a administrative thing with that. Why don't you do the content?
Okay, I think the content is really that we're just trying to get clear support from them around consistency and guidelines and yeah, there's nothing huge new. That we've asked for some clarification about some of the outdoor masking mandates, although I think the governor's office gave plenty of clarification for that today. And there was one other point that we're asking for greater consistency, but the point being that we've got 5 districts that are working together with our local health department to make sure that we're getting consistent guidance and being able to give feedback to the state about when there's shortages in the guidance. And superintendents from all of our groups, but including our own, have been there and been able to represent us well. And then the final thing I just want to say is after Director Malif was talking about how impactful this back to school was for everyone, it just made me mindful of we were going to have a big in-person celebration. We wanted to kind of memorialize this, and then the COVID rates went up and that wasn't something we could do. I just wanted to know, is that something that's still on the radar? Because I feel like when things go back down, that might be a good time to kind of solidify the fact and appreciate that we really are all back together in school and take us one more step forward in being together. Is that still something being considered for when things are safer or not? That's a superintendent question, I think.
Dr. Jarvis, about celebrations, joy.
Yeah, are we going to do an in-person district-wide celebration of any sort down the road to really like mark this? I mean, this is a huge school year. I can't can't state enough what a big deal it is for us to be back in person, and want to appreciate that and continue to use it to bring us together.
And I'll just say there's some indication that there's at the beginnings of a plateauing. Now, I know there'll be a difference of opinion on that, but if in fact that takes place, I think it's going to open the door again to us being able to do more of that in person. The last couple of weeks have been sliding a little bit the opposite way. But as far as specific plans, I'll have to chase that one down for you and get back. I would love to see that in person.
Okay, so thank you. And with the, so the administrative points, so I realize that we discussed as a board, and especially since we have 2 new board members coming on in December, that kind of the reorganization annual meeting, and in terms of switching the liaisons, I would just like to put in a plug though that for the following year, where it should be a stable year because it's a non-election year, to consider having the liaisonships transfer over in September, end of August, September, as a service to our partner organizations so that they have some consistency there. So I'm going to put a plug in for that. And in the meantime, also for all directors, the WASDA networking calls that are statewide that happen on Thursdays at noon, we can all attend because we don't actually participate, but we can receive information. So I would urge, if you have time in your schedule, to attend those. They're highly informative. And then in terms of the East King County, our 5 school districts where both Director Chu and I attend, I find them incredibly valuable. I'm happy to keep doing them, but I do think it would behoove the board as a whole to have someone already transition into my spot. So we can only have 2 people. So we do stay within the bounds of OPMA. And so I'd ask, I gather Director Chu wants to keep doing it for continuity. And then so if one of the other 2 continuing directors would like to do it, we meet Friday mornings from 8 to 10. So just going to put that out there and then you can respond. But I wanted to do that in open meeting and encourage some transition time there. Okay, anything else with liaisonships and our outreach with our community? All right, I'm very excited for the upcoming, basically multiple community forums, discussions, listening sessions. So that's going to be great to hear directly from folks as we've come back together for this school year. And that brings us to, we caught up on a little bit of time, to public comment. I believe we have 1 public comment. 4 now. Okay, great. So we have some new public comment guidelines that we were going to show. Are those on a slide to display from policy 1400?
We didn't include it in the agenda, but should I just pull it up from the policy off the website?
That would be great. I'll read this in the meantime, but we should have that one displayed since we have newly updated that policy. So although public comment is not required by the Open Public Meetings Act, the board recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of involving members of the public. Public comments should be addressed to the board. Public comments are not intended to be a forum for public discourse, but rather an opportunity to provide information relevant to the board's work. Board directors read all public comments received to board@bsd405.org. We also have a phone number that's publicized, so you can leave messages in the language of your choice that are then transcribed and forwarded to us. Portions of 1400 are no longer suspended because we have now passed the policy. While we request that comments avoid harassing or derogatory remarks, please be aware for those listening that while district value is respect, an open forum allows commenters latitude in their expression, and we'll be posting up on the screen additional information regarding that. The board generally does not respond directly to comments made by the public, but we very much appreciate the time put into written, oral, and in-person comments. I'd like to call the first commenter up. I do not have the list.
It's all projected from there, so we have it on one screen.
Well, maybe could you just call up the first person?
Yeah, Victoria, you're up first.
Okay. You will have 2 minutes. We've now faced this where you can see the clock better for your 2 minutes. When you get to 2 minutes, there'll be a reminder. Ms. Gasperich will say that, and then we'd ask that you wrap up a sentence or two, and then if you're unable, then I will have to gavel you. But hopefully, for all commenters, we will not get to that. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I have 2 children in BSD virtual, and my children would normally be at Lake Hills and Spirit Ridge, but they cannot attend school in person. We've loved our time with Bellevue School District until this semester, so thank you very much for that work. I'm here to share with you not only my experience with Edgenuity, but also the experiences of families who are not able to be here because they or their children are immune compromised. I'm concerned about the apparent lack of support for families who need to stay home and the lack of contingency planning for the in-person learners and the increasing disparity and educational inequity being created by the choice of Edgenuity as a learning platform. We heard some really beautiful successes with the in-person school, but please remember that not all students can attend in person. And our first week was very different, not a success. As parents of remote students, we feel abandoned, or worse, that we're being intentionally alienated because we must keep our children home during the pandemic. Edgenuity is not a quality education. The lack of teachers and peers with no feedback or teacher input would be challenging enough, but it is impossible for my kindergartner to learn with Edgenuity because at 5 years old, he's still learning to read. He cannot navigate through the assignments, and the language is too complex with little to attract or retain his attention. For my older child, the curriculum is clearly not aligned with BSD, and the rigid assignments result in too much busy work with repetitive exercise from previous grades. My children would both require full one-to-one support to use Edgenuity. I can only imagine the hardships this is creating for families where all the adults work, even if they are working from home. It was clearly not intended to be used as a standalone curriculum, and we heard from Eva Collins that some improvements are already being worked on, and thank you very much for that beginning. So the only way these disparities will be reversed is to restore the live remote learning for those who want or need to stay home.
We are at the 2-minute mark.
Thank you. We cannot continue to have such a disparity in the quality of education offered to students in person compared to those learning remotely. We need the school district to stand by our mission and accommodate all students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Megan Kirk. Two minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us to speak today. My name is Megan Kirk. I'm the parent of a 3rd grader. Because of our address in Bellevue, he's assigned to Phantom Lake Elementary, which is usually great, but at this time that means he can't go to school in person. My son has health conditions that put him at greater risk of complications from COVID, and unfortunately that means he can't be indoors unmasked with other people outside our household. Phantom Lake is not allowing students to eat lunch outside, so he can't go in person. So we enrolled him in Bellevue Virtual Academy so he could retain some connections with some classmates from last year, where he was in a fully virtual class with great success. Unfortunately, we found Edgenuity isn't adequate and it's not equitable. As you know, there's little teacher and almost no peer-to-peer contact in the program. We've also found that the curriculum would never be approved if it was actually considered by this district. It would never fall under your procedures. It would never pass muster. Just some brief examples. 3rd grade science first lesson starts with the earth rotates around the sun. It doesn't. It rotates around its axis and it orbits around the sun. My 3rd grader actually knew that. Also, an example, the social studies curriculum for 3rd grade starts with stories from the Torah that are described as myth or legend. Later segments of the social studies curriculum describe Native American tribes as people that existed in the past, their ancient history. There is one paragraph in the third grade curriculum that appropriately references Indigenous Americans. That's one paragraph out of like 3 weeks worth of the curriculum. The BBA curriculum is so different than what they're doing in the classrooms that I know I'm not alone in doubting that students will be on track to join in-person classes
We're at time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Lisa Ross.
Hi, I have a second grader currently at Wilburton Elementary. She's one of 3 children that gets to eat outside because that school has failed to inform any of the parents of outdoor lunch. Nice that your students actually get to eat outdoors and that all those students do. My child's still at risk because she has to go inside to join all the other kids that have eaten lunch indoors. There was an open letter written by an epidemiologist directed to your board talking about the necessity to have outdoor lunch safe. What is your plan for during winter months? Shoreline school districts have got tents outside. I hear you guys say it's too difficult for us to figure that out. We have many resources in Bellevue School District. I'm sure parents would be willing to volunteer to put up and take down the tents on a daily basis if need be. I'm certain we could talk to fire chiefs to get that done. So I'd like to hear what you're going to actually do to ensure we have outdoor lunch safe for all children, especially the elementary age group that cannot get vaccinated. Next, the lack of consistent testing. You guys can do rapid testing very simply. Biden just announced today free access to testing for schools, as well as at costs that you can order from Amazon, Walmart, and other national retailers. I'd like to see that plan implemented. And then to second everyone else's comments about Ingenuity, my daughter would be doing online remote learning if it had been like what it was last year, but that program was so insufficient, there was no way I was going to sign her up for that. But if she gets quarantined, which is likely going to be the case because of all these failed safety protocols that are not being implemented equally across this district, what is she going to do when she's quarantined at home? How is she going to be educated? Right now, I've got no answers from the principal, from the board, from anybody, not even from local parents groups online. No one seems to know what's going to happen when we have to quarantine. So there's another big glaring issue. And then lastly, I'm just really saddened and dismayed at this whole Edgeunity situation. It just seems like a cop-out, and I felt like there's way more that this district, with the resources that we have, that could have been done and should be done. The school year just got started, so I certainly hope that you guys can take into consideration. Many of the parents can't be here today because many of them are working or at home with their children, so several of us are here speaking on their behalf. So again, I'd like to see outdoor lunch, rapid testing, and a better online program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Preet Gandhi.
Thanks for the time. My name is missing an E, it's Preeti, but that used up 2 seconds. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a second grade advanced learner and a 7th grade advanced learner as well. My second grader is high risk, so we cannot send him to school. I echo these comments made by these ladies on Edgeunity. Other than the curriculum and lack of teacher, the SEL component is completely missing. Kids learn from their peers. They learn together, discovering things from their teachers. They just need to be with other kids and teachers virtually. And as of this morning, my 7-year-old, who's an eager learner, does not want to go to school. I don't know what to tell him. He told me he does not want to learn anymore. This is a big problem. We need to do something about the social component, and one lunch a week, one Teams call a week with a teacher is not going to solve it. Virtual learning for my family was a smash hit last year. I did not think it would be, but it was awesome. My kids enjoyed, they excelled, they were ready at 8 o'clock, showered and ready to go and learn. Today, he was dragging his feet, taking a 25-minute shower, did not want to finish breakfast, did not want to sit down. That is not the child I know. The child wants to learn. We know, we teach him every day, so many things, we're very involved parents. I'm seeing a completely different child. Please, please enhance the virtual program. Edgeunity is very far from being sufficient. The curriculum is not good. It doesn't match BSD standards. He's learning to add and subtract in a 3rd grade advanced program. He's ready for fractions and multiplication. That's just an example. I won't say more about the curriculum, but please support them emotionally. They feel isolated. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our public comment section. Again, our volunteer board very much appreciates the time and effort put into public comments. Although we do not respond directly to public comments in these meetings, we do read and take into account what we see here and are able to process for these meetings into our role as board directors. So thank you again. That brings us to item 7, which is our study session on levy planning. Dr. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Wiest. I'm going to start with the fact that I'm so old. When I first started in this business, we had a levy every year. And every February, we had to go out to the public and convince them to renew the levy because it was good for 1 year and it expired. That then became once every 2 years, and you could do a 2-year levy. And then eventually it became an option for a 3 or 4 year levy. The reason I referenced the 1 year or 2 years is one of the tasks that we didn't typically have was convince people what it was all about. They hadn't forgotten the fact that they just passed a levy the previous February. What we find in today's world is that for many of our citizens, many of our parents, many of our staff, 4 years is not something that they necessarily were here or recollect. So part of the task is to start with a world that says, what is the finance system in the state of Washington, and where does the levy fit in? 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, McCleary came along, and the final solution for McCleary. I think there are people now, as they approach the question of the levy, that don't necessarily understand where McCleary fits in with the local levy and what the levy can be used for, what it sponsors, what it doesn't pay for, versus basic education. So I say that because I've asked for this time in a study session with the board to begin the conversation that says in approximately 6 or 7 weeks, the board will be asked to pass a resolution to put a levy election date of, if it's February of 22, that would renew an expiring levy. So our current levy in the Bellevue School District will expire in the year 2022. One of the unique characteristics of school levies is that they are passed for a certain period of time, in this case 4 years, and then they expire and they go away. And the school district, if that was not renewed, would not be able to collect a very significant amount. And I'm resisting telling, because we're going to ask for Melissa to really give some of the facts of our levy. But we wanted to begin the conversation with the board and really alert the community that this February will be a renewal of the 4-year levy, that this levy is hugely important to the school district in sponsoring what we do, and to be able to start to talk about the facts that go with that. For those that may not realize what the levy is all about, for those that may be confused by McCleary, that those who have spent a year and a half looking at a remote world and aren't quite sure where it fits. So we've got a huge job in front of us. When I say we, you'll also hear in Melissa DeVita's discussion, kind of separate the part that the board does and the school district can do versus what the community needs to do. Because at a certain point, besides putting it up for by resolution on the ballot, it will take a community effort to figure out how to support that and educate people. I will certainly be on the road and visiting anywhere that's willing to hear me talk about the levy and others. But we wanted to begin that conversation tonight because that 6 or 7 week period will go very quickly. The board will have passed a resolution, and then in many ways, the board has to step out of that and hand it back to the community. And for most of traditionally December and January, there is an opportunity for the community to have many, many conversations about what the levy is for and how it works. So with that introduction, I really have asked Melissa to begin the task of grounding us all in some facts of Bellevue and the levy and what's ahead for us and a calendar and a timeline and what the requirements are, and be able to hand that back to you with the sense that the board will have some discussion. Melissa needs to equip us with the details of what's needed, and then the board gets to make a decision and move forward. So Melissa, would you represent this on behalf of the financial stability of the Bellevue School District?
Yes, thank you so much. We can go ahead and put up the few slides that I've got.
And while that's coming up, I will note I did set the timer for 45 minutes for this section. So directors, if we end up having a lot of questions, we can certainly extend it to the full hour, but in the interest of catching up on time. No.
I just didn't, like, usually if we want to generate. Well, while they're doing that, I think I can just talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I did want to talk a little bit about the property taxes in Bellevue and what we actually collect in the city of Bellevue, because it's not just for schools. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about what the levy is used for within the Bellevue School District and why it's so important. And then finally, we'll talk about the upcoming election that is scheduled for February of 2022 if the board passes the resolution and decides to go on for an election. So with that, are we getting there almost? There we go.
I just want to say your audio is coming in and out, so I don't know.
Oh, it is. I'll hold it up closer. Is that better? All right, let's go to slide 3 would be great. There we go. All right. So local property taxes, we pay. Is that one easier? Oh my. All righty. So the property taxes we pay don't just go to schools. So many times people think that school property taxes equal schools, and that is not really the case. We pay property taxes here for a lot of our taxes, and so you know, the city of Bellevue collects property taxes, King County, the library, the Port Authority, Sound Transit. So there are a lot of people who collect property taxes from the communities around Bellevue. And just because you live in the city of Bellevue does not necessarily mean that you're paying Bellevue School District local taxes. You pay property taxes based on what different districts your home is in. So if you live in Redmond, but you attend Bellevue schools and you're in the Bellevue School District, you will pay Bellevue School District taxes. If you live in Bellevue and you are in the Issaquah School District, you will pay Issaquah School District taxes. So it's important that people know that where they live dictates whose taxes they pay. And school districts do not have the same boundaries as the cities do. The majority of your taxes do go to schools, however. You pay basically based on $1,000 of assessed value. And the King County assessor is the one who sets the value of your home. So when you get the little postcard in the mail and it says what your property is valued at, that comes from the King County assessor's office. Then you pay $3.09 per $1,000 to the state for schools. And so that money goes basically from here directly to the state, and that is used to pay the state portion of our funding. You then pay $2.60 per 1,000 for our local taxes, and that is really broken down into 3 different things. Our educational programs and operations, our capital and tech, and our debt service. The 2 that are coming up for election are the educational programs and the capital and technology, and those both expire The last election we had was for bonds. And that is a little bit different because that we're asking voters to authorize us to take on a certain level of debt that the voters are saying that they will repay. With a levy, we're asking voters to pay a certain amount of money to us that we can use in very specific ways as designated by the legislature, the state legislature, that is.
Melissa?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we did a jinx. We both said your name at the same time.
Good.
So can you clarify one thing that I think we all get asked frequently and would be helpful for those who are listening to know? When you say, when you fleshed out the portion of the taxes based on home value that goes for education, and you made it clear it goes to the state, can you perhaps give a before and after for McCleary so people understand essentially the value you said, dollars per thousand value goes to the state, but that does not mean it's coming to Bellevue. It means it's going to a pool,
right?
And then it's redistributed. I think that's the piece that people don't understand is before and after McCleary, because we continue to hear, I pay high taxes, I live in Bellevue, and the assumption is your home value dictates how much comes back to Bellevue. Can you help
and it
clarify
does not.
that? Maybe the before and after effect of McCleary?
Yeah, so before McCleary, the state school tax for the Bellevue area was, I'm going to say, right around $2.50 per 1,000 of assessed value. And the state levies a rate. And so no matter when your assessed value goes up, you will be paying more to the state because you're paying this rate per 1,000. That money goes to the state and then it comes back to us based upon the state formula, which says how much we get on a per pupil basis and then how much additional we get, for example, for special education or other programs such as advanced learning, transportation, that type of a thing. Communities in the Seattle area generally pay more into the state than they receive back. And that happens often in many states. So in our area, we pay more to the state than we generally will receive back from the state for our students. It is spread out across every student, and it is so that every student in the state has an opportunity for basic education. We then fund local levies so that we can have a school district that provides the education that we want for our students. However, we are also limited on how much we can collect for those, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We levy an amount. And so when your assessed value goes up, the tax rate will drop because we can only collect the amount that we've asked for. We cannot collect more. And so even though your assessed value goes up, the amount that we're collecting will stay the same or could even drop depending upon how the value of your home and property changed in comparison to the value of the whole.
And do you know what percentage of the tax that goes out from Bellevue comes back? And
I don't off the top of my head.
Seema, I think one of the things you're asking about is the yellow versus the blue on the thing. That does show a comparative percentage of what we get back here and what goes to the state. Or is that different?
No, it doesn't. Those are, so we pay $3.09 for the state school tax, and we pay $2.60 for the local tax. So those are two different tax rates. One comes directly to us, that $2.60, and it comes for those three different things. So our education program levy, our capital and tech levy, and then to pay back our debt and interest.
I totally get that. So are you saying, so is your question then just asking what portion of the blue comes back to us?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I don't have that off the top of my head.
Thank you. Yeah, but just for the benefit of those, I mean, the general idea behind McCleary was a positive one, which was someone's education, a child's education should not be determined based on the wealth of their parent or their community.
Or the zip code they live
There should be a
in.
standard throughout the whole state, and that's what
Correct.
it's trying to achieve.
Right, so they were trying to achieve at least a basic level of education for every student, no matter what zip code they lived in. Correct.
Before you move on from this slide, I just wanted to clarify one thing. The two in green are the levies that are up for election this year. The bonds, I just want to be clear, those that it says debt service, that is the bond levy that funds the rebuilding of our buildings.
Correct.
So all of the brand new, pretty shiny buildings we have were funded by that bond.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So there is always the question of why do we need local levies? And with McCleary, it was often said that the state is now fully funding K-12 education. I will say that the state fully funds basic K-12 education. And so you can see that they fund 24 credits at high school, and 24 credits is what is required to graduate. So that if a student has any problems, if they fail a class, if they get sick and can't finish out a class, if they drop a class, then they have to make that up in the summer or whatever in order to graduate. We offer 28 credits at high school. Those different 4 credits we pay for by our levy. They do 7.5 hours a day. They partially fund special education and gifted programs. They only have a 6-period day for middle school and high school. And they have very limited funding for technology and capital, including building maintenance. You can see on the right, there's a lot of things that we fund with our levy at every level, whether it be elementary, middle school, or high school. The elementary computer science we fund with our levy. The extracurricular activities and athletics we fund with our levies. The ability for students to have art, music, band and orchestra at elementary schools we fund with our levy. We fund our curriculum, especially the technical curriculum, with our levies. And so you can see the big list, and 20% of our budget is from our levies. And so if our levies are not renewed in February, then we will have to reduce our spending by 20%. And a lot of these things will be impacted pretty severely.
Melissa, can we just say for the record, like you were implying the state funds basic education, but the state is not currently fully funding basic education, especially when you consider the fact that special needs programming is not fully supported by the state. And if you have a special need and you are coming to our schools, the state is not fully funding what it takes to serve you, and like that all by itself. And then half of these other things in the right-hand column, I would say at the very least, at least half of the things that are listed there are part of what one would consider basic education.
Yeah.
Is that
I would agree.
accurate?
Special education, the school district funds approximately $18 million beyond what the state or the federal government fund.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I love that Christine flagged that. That's where we go in debt, right? That's the unmet need we try to cover to our, to our financial detriment, in the sense that we aren't able to get those funds. So
Right.
I don't know that people realize that.
Yeah, we also, we fund more nurses than the state funds. We fund a higher level of security and safety than the state funds. You can go and compare what the state funds versus what we fund. We fund smaller class sizes than what the state funds. So there's comparisons that we can do, and all of those things would be impacted if these levies do not pass in February. Now, most districts, I will say this, most districts get funding either in the form of local tax levies or supported by the state through levy equalization dollars. All districts have to run levy elections. If they can't pass them in their district, then they do get levy equalization dollars from the state to help make up that difference when they can't collect local levies. And the use of levy funds varies by district. Districts get to decide how they use these funds, whereas there's other funds that we get from the state that we don't get to decide how we use them, which is what makes the levy funds so attractive, right? Because we get to say, what are the needs of our community that we would like to, how would we like to satisfy the needs of our community and our students? Go ahead. So as Art had mentioned, we do come back every 4 years for these levy funds. That is different than other states. So I've lived in 2 other states, Colorado and Illinois, and in both those states, once a levy is approved for local schools, it stays. So anytime that you're looking at voting on a new levy, it's additive. That is not true in the state of Washington. In the state of Washington, the local levies will go away. And so this is basically maintaining status quo as opposed to building it on top of what the district is already getting. And so that's just a little bit different here. We are limited on the amount of levy that we can collect that goes into our operations or for educational programs. That limit is $2,663 in the 2022 calendar year per student, or the lower of that, or $2.50 per 1,000. And if you back on the very first slide that we were looking at, you can see that ours is at 67 cents per 1,000. So we're significantly below that $2.50 per 1,000 because we are a property rich district. The downtown area and all the businesses that we have here make us a very property rich district. Go ahead, Eric.
So I just
Director
want to add, this is the part that changed with McCleary, this limit on what we could raise. And that was passed in 2016? Is that?
I want to say 2018.
2018? Okay. So there's this perception within our community and within the state as a whole that Bellevue is a very wealthy district and has lots of money to do everything that we could possibly want. And that was probably true prior to 2018, because as you just said, our property tax rate was 67 cents per 1,000, dollars of assessed value. It's minuscule compared to anywhere else. And so we could raise pretty much as much money as we wanted with a really low tax rate. And that's great. Now we cannot do that. We are capped at $2.50, no, whatever probably the lower rate for the student.
The 2,000, yes, we are.
Do you happen to know, now it's 67 cents per $1,000. Do you happen to know what it was prior to 2018?
Yeah, give me some time. We're going to get back and look at that. So in a later slide.
I feel like that's going to be illustrative to people who say, you have tons of money, you don't need any.
So I want to just give a little bit more detail on that. So prior to McCleary, there was still a limit, but it was based upon the percentage of total spending that you had in the previous year. And Bellevue School District was a grandfathered school district. So we could levy more dollars than other neighboring districts. Other districts were limited, I'm going to try and get recall, but we're limited to about 28%. We were limited to 34%. I'm pulling those out of the air a little bit, but it's within range. And so we could levy more in local levies than other districts, and it did make us a rich district. That is no longer the case. And in fact, I would argue that we are underfunded compared to other districts in the state, because with McCleary, the state also implemented a regionalization factor. And that is supposed to make up the difference for cost of living. We know it is more expensive to live in Bellevue or the Seattle metro area than it is in other parts of the state. And so, so we receive, based upon the state's funding, we receive an additional 18% on top of what, say, a district on the east side of the state may receive. So it's just an 18% bump because we know housing costs, salary costs, everything are more expensive here. However, we do not receive that same 18% bump for our levy. The fact is, no matter if we use our dollars from the state or the dollars from the levy to buy it, it still costs us more. And so I would argue that because we don't get that 18% on the levy, we're actually being funded at a lower level for our levy than, say, somebody like Spokane or Yakima or others who don't have the same cost of living. And I think that's one of the flaws in the funding formula that they put in place with McCleary. So I would argue that we went from getting more than other districts to getting less than other districts. I also know that Seattle, for example, is one of the only districts in the state that can collect over $3,000 per pupil. And that was funded in the subsequent year past McCleary. That was added later. And they were basically isolated out, and they added more funding to Seattle. So I would argue too that that puts Seattle in a different position than other districts as well. But we are limited. We are no longer a rich district. You're absolutely right. And so we have to pick and choose how we spend our levy dollars. There is no limit on the capital and tech levy. We get about $53 million a year in our education program levy, and we get about $44 million in our capital and tech levy. Our capital and tech levy, we are limited on how we can use those dollars. So we can use them for technology. We can use them for maintenance on our buildings. We use them for all the technology that the kids have, whether it be a laptop, an iPad. We use them for the technology in our classrooms, whether it be the cameras, the TVs on the walls, all of those types of things. But we cannot use them for teachers or teacher salaries. So there are limits on what we can use those funds for, which then basically limits how, that really limits how much we're going to ask for, because there's only so many things we can spend them on, right? As dictated by the state legislature. Voters authorize how much the district can collect, and it is an up to amount. We often ask for more than we are allowed to collect in case things change in the future. So for example, I think that the amount that we should ask voters to approve should include that 18% bump. In case the legislature decides to provide that to us, then we don't have to go back out and say, oh, by the way, can you give us a little bit more? So we always ask for a bit more. It's also, since it's based on the number of students that we have, we will build in a higher rate of growth for the pupils and things like that, so that we can get enough money to support the growth that we may see in the district. And then the debt service funds, as we talked before, really pay off the bonds and interest that we use to finance our new facilities. The difference with a bond election is we do ask for how much debt we can take on, and then we take on that debt as we sell bonds. So we had an election in February of 2020 last time for bonds. We were authorized for $675 million. We are actually selling the first series of bonds underneath that authorization this month, and we haven't been then collecting any taxes for that authorization up to this point. So as soon as we sell these bonds, then we will collect to pay them off. Yes, Erica, Dr. Malif.
So if there's no limit on the capital and tech levy, and last year, I imagine we spent way more on tech than we probably ever have before. Mm-hmm. Every elementary school student got a computer and iPad where they never had before. So are we going to be asking for more? I see your numbers here, but I don't know how that relates to like percentages or whatever. Are we going to be asking for more in order? I mean, and now these elementary students have these computers and iPads, and they're continuing to keep them. What about things like, you know, concurrent instruction in the elementary classrooms, which we didn't have last year? Like, are we planning to have those options built into this sort of thing?
Yes, so we haven't figured out the specific amounts yet. Technology is becoming a bigger part of our education of our students. And so we are expecting to bump that amount up for the future. We delayed some projects and other things in order to get technology in the hands of every student. Prior to the pandemic, we had classroom sets of laptops for students to utilize. So say the ratio was like 2 students to every 1 laptop as opposed to 1-to-1 at the elementary levels. But we're not planning on going backwards, right? So we will need to bump that up to continue to have kids having access to technology. So if you go to the next slide, you can see what our rates have been for our educational programs and capital and tech. Right now, as I said, we collect $53 million for our education programs. We collect $44 million for our capital and tech. When we come to the board with a resolution, we will have the amounts that we're going to ask voters to approve, and we'll talk about how we're going to use those funds and what we want to supplement, including the capital and tech. As I said before, these are replacement levies, and you can see how the rate has dropped. And then it flattened out. And my guess is that in 2022, with the significant growth, that it's going to drop again pretty significantly, probably 20%, if that is the growth that we've seen in our assessed value across the entire area. So our rates kind of move with the assessed value and then how much we're asking for our voters. You can also then go to the next slide and see what our passage rates have been. We were pretty high through 2014. 2018 was in the midst of a pretty significant downturn. And so that impacted our passing rates as well. 2022, when we went for the bond measure, we were back up to about approximately 64%. We are hugely grateful to our community for their support of the district. They have been supportive of us. The last time that we had any issue passing anything was in 1994. So our community has been very supportive of our district for a number of years and have always put the students and their education as a priority with their tax dollars, and we truly do appreciate that. So as we move forward, we'll again ask the community for that support. If you go to the next slide, February 8th is the election day. The blue items are things that the Citizens Committee is responsible for. The items in black are the things that we are responsible for. So we will ask the board of directors to adopt a resolution for the levies and these specific amounts in October. We will then form a campaign committee, which is a citizens committee. We will conduct a community phone survey, as we do pretty much every year in November, to get feedback from the community on how well we've been supporting them, their students, and overall their perception of the district. In November and December, we will be primarily planning the campaign. What we've found in the past is people are very focused on the holiday season and all of the things that come with that, including the stresses and family and everything else, that really any campaign work that we would do kind of goes by the wayside. And so we need to really spend a lot of time planning, getting endorsements and doing other things, and then we push very hard come January. Ballots do go out January 19th, so we don't have a lot of time in January to push hard because they do out so early. And then people can continue to vote until February 8th. So we push really hard in the January timeframe. But we'll do work prior to then to really understand where we are and what the options are and all of that. So one more slide. Next steps for us: determine the levy amounts. We talked briefly about that, develop our resolution, and then identify campaign committee chairperson and campaign committee members and begin that forming of that. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm happy to answer other questions that directors may have.
If I may, I'm going to add a little bit of talk about prototypical for a minute. I'm back really to the question of what the state pays for and what the district pays for. The state under McCleary and under what emerged in that funding system put together something called a prototypical funding. And they identified how many staff members they would fund for each 1,000 students in the school district. And then they identified the prototypical size of that school. So two of the, I guess, more famous or infamous examples of what the state pays for and doesn't pay for, school nursing in a time of a pandemic or any other time. The school nurse funded by the state is approximately 1/10 of a nurse for a school of 600 middle school students, and that's it. As you look at the health techs and the services that are provided, that's funded by the levy. One that people make fun of, but for good reason, was a psychologist and the funding of a psychologist in the state of Washington. 17 1,000ths of a psychologist would be funded for an elementary school. So approximately 4 days of psychologist would be funded for each of our elementary schools, or for the smaller ones, half of that. You might get 2 days for the entire year for a psychologist. So I emphasize that just to go back to the prototypical system that exists and what it left on the table. And for districts like ours, there was no question we were not going to cut back to that prototypical, and the state holds the promise that someday they'll fix the prototypical model and they'll add funding. But the fact is they're not funding basic education in anything close to what we provide in terms of the teachers, the number of teachers, the services that we provide. So I could give you a lot more examples on what the prototypical model funds and what it doesn't fund. But the point would be, you're going to see some true color of what the levy is all about as it sustains the kind of program we have. And if you were to attempt to go back to prototypical funding, you would see a massive set of cuts in programs and activities and people in the Bellevue School District. Again, I join you, Melissa. This community has been marvelous to support the schools and value education. So we don't go around threatening people, and we don't talk about cuts as much as refreshing for people's memories that there still is a levy, it still is absolutely vital, and it becomes, as you see this timeline, it becomes something that we get to put out the information. Our job is to inform and educate, but the citizens' job then is to figure out what to do to round up the support. So my job as a superintendent, and really staff-wise, will be every possible meeting I can attend in Rotary or Kiwanis or citizens group or a coffee clutch at a house to be able to answer questions and provide information. But all the publications that are sent out, all really the fundraising and the paying for advertising is going to be dependent on the community understanding that. So it is something that we get to do as part of our business because it is so vital to sustain the program. And I think by and large, I can make the statement that says most people, even if they have agreements or disagreements with the school district, understand that the way to fix that is not to take away $60 million worth of funding and then figure out what's left, because that hurts everybody. So with that, I just add that piece and then I hand it back to you, President.
So thank you for that presentation. Directors, do you have additional questions? I know we peppered them throughout. Is there anything else? comments, questions?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, agree. Thank you. The thoroughness and the details, much appreciated. Thank you for doing that. Will you get back to us with that answer on the blue part?
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you, and I know Deputy Superintendent DeVita does also this talk with numerous groups, but I'm glad it's recorded here and we can reference that. I think there are many people who could take a look at this presentation, learn a lot, and then become ambassadors for us as well in getting our community to understand the importance of that. And I think a number of the comments that were raised to really emphasize where we might have been historically, where we are today, how we are underfunded in many ways. Bellevue has changed so much. We're extremely diverse and have the needs not only to support the excellence like we see in that slide comparing versus what is barely basic education, but also because our budget incorporates so much to support students with diversity of needs. It's really important. Yes.
I have one question. I think it's a Melissa question, which is Dr. Jarvis at the end was talking about sort of the distinction between what can be done by the community versus what can be done by the district. So I was just thinking like what I wish people knew in the community. And let's just be clear, most people are not listening in the community. They're like sitting by their phones, like listening in on tonight's meeting. So you'd think, okay, well, we need a broad campaign for people to understand because number of well-educated people who will say, I pay taxes directly to your district. It's a lot of people. So who actually pays for the campaign? Like that public awareness, that doesn't come from the district. That has to be privately raised. Is that right?
Correct.
Can you give a little bit of kind of context for how that works and what we do there?
So the district is allowed to share facts. So I'm allowed to share facts around what our funding looks like, what it's used for. I cannot encourage people to vote yes or no. I can encourage them to vote. Please vote. But I can't encourage them one way or the other. All of the campaign things like the signs, the mailings, all of that is paid for based on donations to our Citizens Campaign Committee. So we get donations from various sources, and then that money is used to pay for the actual campaign that encourages people to vote one way or the other.
I think Carolyn has experience a little bit with this, and I wondered if you wanted to say a few words there, because I think you did it last.
It's pretty much what she was talking about. You have a citizens committee, you try to keep those lines, not cross over, not say the wrong thing in a board meeting, and then it's up to the citizens to raise the money and execute the campaign. And if anybody from the district, including us, wants to help, we have to do it like on our off hours. But I wanted to ask something else or say something else, which was just as I was thinking about this whole thing, you went over these, but there's two things out there that I think people are just thinking and maybe not getting and that are going to be our hurdles. And one is the one you already said, I pay so much in taxes, why do you need more? That's, and that's for people who aren't going to come and listen to us for an hour. They just put that out there. And then the other one is, because school was closed, you don't need money, and I'm mad at you anyway. And those are I think the two things we're going to have to deal with.
So the why more, I think people need to understand that these are levies that are going away, and the why more is what I was talking about is reminiscent of other states, right? So where other states it is additive, these are basically replacing those that are expiring. So our levies expire here.
Yeah.
It's a renewal.
We're going to need to hit, like have that like right at the tip of our tongue.
Right, they are renewal levies. I'm mad at you. It's kind of like cutting your nose to spite your face, right? That's the saying my mom used to use, is that, Yeah, it just doesn't seem like a logical answer to resolving issues. And we do need to work with our public and our people and our parents and our students to resolve issues. Just like we heard tonight about the issues around, the virtual school. I don't have all the answers to that, but obviously there's some things that we're going to have to address, right? And we will try and address them the best we can. And we may not address them to everybody's 100% satisfaction because we're trying to work with 18,000, how many students? But taking away 20% of our budget doesn't help us resolve anything. In fact, it creates more issues probably for kids and families.
I have to add, as the outsider who's come into Bellevue, the tax rate of 67 cents per thousand for the levy. You'll look around the state and you have the districts at 250 and the districts at 1 to 50, but it's an enviable position to have the rate that we have. It's based on the fact that we have a mixed set of valuations that add up to Bellevue as the total assessed valuation, but the rate is incredibly low. And I realize that if you're a very expensive home, you're paying taxes on an expensive home, but not for the levy. The levy rate is extraordinarily low. And I need to do a good job of helping people understand the comparative rates out and around in other school districts and what we have in Bellevue. And it's not the school levy that's causing somebody heartburn on their taxes. That it's well spent and well funded. So I guess I just comment as the person who just got here, and I was in the most affluent district in Pierce County, and the rate was over twice what you have here. And that was the most affluent school district in Pierce County.
So I have a quick couple of just tiny questions. One is, can we make sure that when we do things like pass the resolution, that we have both the resolution and then the fact sheet, the objective piece, available so that all the board directors can make sure that in our liaisonships and all the other places that we share that fact and those facts with people, and also the information to get, if they're interested in doing more, how they can support or how they can get involved in or find out more about the group. And then second, will we need someone from the board to serve as a liaison again? Okay, so folks should maybe start thinking about whether or not that's something they want to do. And third, do you know if we have somebody in the community who's already interested in chairing this for us, or are we still looking around?
We have a few possibilities that we're going to reach out to and participate with. So I think we've got some people who were in part of the bond campaign, and so the goal is to have some people that have been through this before and some new people so that you continue to refresh those groups.
Thank you. And one more request, just can we make sure that we as board directors get some sort of, from legal or from someone, just a concise refresher about what we're allowed to say and do and whatever. That would be super, super helpful. And I would finally like to encourage those who may not continue to serve on our board but continue to be part of our community to consider their role in this moving forward. That's all.
That's already been broached. Okay. So with that, are there any other comments?
We may have found our 2 volunteers.
No. Okay. Any other comments? All right. So with that, I'll just echo having those fact sheets, I think, are really important. A lot of points that have been brought up at this meeting and before, not only related to the levy, but in terms of the financial situation we find ourselves in. We talked about only the 0.75 reimbursement for our virtual students. And so in general, harnessing the passion and advocacy of this community to be speaking with our legislators. I know all of us on the board take that responsibility seriously and meet with our legislators, and yet having additional voice to that. So I think this levy and the discussion around our finances and how we support a robust educational community allows us to broach those issues as well. So I don't want to muddy the waters, and yet it really is, we need to fund these somehow. And so this is the bridge. And yet if we could have greater support for those basic items, or now, the world has changed and virtual is a really important component for some of our students. Having those issues really brought together in that fact sheet and tell that compelling story will be useful for us, and then to distribute widely to many of our advocacy partners. We do have people who are willing to write and take those meetings, and yet often not really sure what those salient points are. So I think this is a golden opportunity for that. All right, we are at the end. I don't see any more comments. So that brings us to item 8, which is adjournment. And I would like to say we are adjourned.
All right.
Yeah, now we have another hour and a half of meeting.